Greetings everyone, Brett here with Hammerhead Model Making, and on today's episode we're going to be taking a look at the Academy 1/72nd scale F-15E. I want to preface this a little bit by saying that the F-15 is probably my most favorite modern aircraft, and it's a shame that I haven't built any on the channel yet, but I think that's mainly just because I'm afraid to do it wrong, because it is one of my favorites. So I figured I would kind of ease into it with this Academy kit. Now, I went into this kit kind of expecting it to be like Academy's F-14 and F-18 kits, which are both brilliant kits, and I have to admit I was slightly disappointed. And I'll point out a few areas in the build of where I was disappointed. Overall, it's not a terrible kit, but it's definitely not up there with Academy's F-14 and F-18 kits in this scale. The biggest thing you need to know about this kit is you have to replace the engine nozzles, because the ones that you get in the kit are just pure garbage. I mean, I don't understand how they even let those ones out through quality control. But other than that, it's pretty straightforward for the most part. What this kit does have going for it is superb surface detail. I mean, just the level of detail in the panel lines, the riveting, the fasteners, everything is just top notch, super crisp, looks great. Another interesting thing about this kit is if you make a few modifications like I'm doing here, all of the parts that are supposed to be bare metal around the engine can actually be kept separate and painted separately, so you don't have to do masking, or at least tons of masking for the metal parts, which I think is actually pretty handy. And so you have to clip off these tabs on the side, and then you can actually slide the metallic parts on to the kit. So if you make the modifications, it's done in a way that you can leave it separate and paint it separately. One thing that Academy does do well here is these single slide molded ejection seats. Those are really nice. They have the same thing on their F-18s and F-14 kits as well. Very, very high quality. Looks good. And pretty straightforward and simple in terms of the construction. You just got to put the back rails on. That's really about it. And building up the cockpit, there's not a lot that actually goes into the cockpit. It's all pretty well molded together. So we can quickly get the parts ready for painting here. So that's what I'm just doing, putting it on this little popsicle stick so that I can prime and paint them and move forward that way. There's a few more modifications I'm making to the engine area, and that is going to be so that it can accept the Aries resin engine nozzles that I purchased for this kit. Like I mentioned, you immediately have to get rid of the actual kit nozzles because they look terrible. So what I'm doing here is removing the attachment points for the kit nozzles, and then I'm going to carve out the inside so that the afterburner tubes fit into the plastic part better. So here you can see the diameter of the tubes is just too big to fit in that part, the kit part, so you have to use your hobby knife or a Dremel with a rotary sanding bit on it to carve out that inside lip there. Pretty standard, or not standard, but it's pretty simple in terms of modifications. You're just removing plastic like this. Here I'm going in with some sandpaper to kind of clean that out and smooth out that joint. Just as long as you can fit the afterburner tube in there, you should be good. There are a few little bits of plastic here that I have to keep checking and making sure that they fit right. And once you get to a point, it should just drop right in, just like that. So as far as modifications go for Aftermarket, this one is pretty tame. Now, the Aries resin afterburner nozzles are extremely detailed and delicate. So you have to start off by removing the actual burner can from its casting block. And while not terribly difficult, you do just have to be careful because it's so thin and you don't want to break it and crush it. You do have to install all of the actuators on the engine nozzle itself, so that can be a little intimidating because these are quite small parts and there are a lot of them that go on each burner can. But if you just take your time, it actually ends up going pretty quickly. and before you know it, you'll be done. So I'm just installing the actuators with some super glue. There are little divots where they fit in, so it's pretty obvious where they're supposed to go, and you just kind of have to work your way around. Excuse me. The once you get it done, it looks pretty good. So I think all in all, both these took me just a little over like an hour to get them done. And then for the actual exhaust tubes themselves, you do have a photo etch part for the flame holder that you have to fit in there. It's kind of finicky how it fits in there, and honestly, you really can't see much once it's all done. But I mean, it does look good, and again, it's huge improvement over what the kit was giving you. And then finally, you can put the turbine blades in, and that finishes off your engine. But like I said, you really can't see anything in there. So now that those are done, we can get the engine nozzles installed into the engine section of the kit. So again, this is just going to be glued in with some super glue to bond the resin to the plastic. And then we can go ahead and set that aside while we work on the rest of the kit. But yeah, big improvement. Looks way better. So moving on to painting the interior stuff, we are going to start off with some white here. And this is going to be for our intake trunks as well as our landing gear pieces. The intake trunking for this kit seems somewhat overcomplicated to me. And if you were really trying to go for like a seamless intake, this would require a lot of work. There are multiple seams, not just like top half and bottom half seams that you have to clean up, but like where the intake trunks meet the actual intakes themselves, there are quite a few seams there. So if you were going for a seamless intake look, you would either need to spend a few days sanding the inside of these somewhat small intake trunks, or just buy aftermarket. I kind of took a gamble and didn't do anything to clean up the intake trunks, just because I kind of figured you wouldn't be able to see much. And I mean, unless you're shining a light directly down the intake trunks, you really can't see anything. But I know for some modelers out there, that is something that is important to them. So just be aware the intakes on these would require a lot of work. So we can move on to painting the cockpit. So just getting everything a nice good coat of gray. And there's a lot of gray in this cockpit. I do like to keep parts separate when I can. So I have like the control sticks there. And now we can switch to painting the first stage compressors for the engine intakes. Normally these would be much more of like a steel color. I'm using aluminum in this case just to keep it a little bit brighter, so that in the off chance you are looking down the intake trunks, you would kind of get a little bit more color from a little brightness from those compressor blades. But so not strictly accurate, but I think it works from a artistic point of view. So here we're just getting the intake trunk halves put together. Credit to Academy for like the extremely tight-fitting locking pins on this thing. I mean, it leaves no question how it's supposed to go together. And once you get it together, the fit's pretty good. But like I said, you just got some rather large seams running down the inside of this. And you'll see later once we get it installed and how everything fits together, how there's just so many seams that you would have to clean up on this. So getting the intake trunks installed into the fuselage real fast. Again, really good locating tabs and pins. It almost fits like snap fit and a push fit. So you could almost get away with not using glue if you wanted to. That's kind of how tight the engineering is on this, but I always recommend glue. Painting details in the cockpit. So I'm just using some Vallejo colors here, mainly just black, to get the details painted. The Academy does offer decals for some of the instruments, but not all of them, which is interesting choice. You get decals for all the side console details, but only get decals for the main instrument displays on the instrument panels. So everything else you need to hand paint. Here we're going to give everything a nice good coat of gloss so that we can prep it for decals, and you'll notice that gloss bottle was pretty much empty. I do go through a lot of the gloss, but we're going ahead and give everything a coat of gloss. So here we're installing decals for the side walls, or for the side console panel. The decals fit really well. They matched up to the to the actual raised detail on the kit itself. So very, very good coordination between Academy and Cartograph on that matter. You could hand paint all these details, and it would probably look pretty good, just because the actual like relief detail is really nice and crisp. But I'm just not that good of a painter, to be honest. So we're going to hit everything with a little bit of Solvaset. That'll help those decals conform down to those details. So like I said, you do get decals for the actual instrument, like the actual displays, but it's just the center of the display, which is strange because you could easily just paint the insides of these. So, I mean, it is what it is. Once all the decals are down and settled, we can give everything a matte coat and seal all of our work in there. And so for this, I'm just using the Vallejo matte varnish. I thin this with a little bit of X20A thinner from Tamiya, and it sprays pretty well, pretty nice, and gives it doesn't necessarily go super dead flat. I would say it's more of like a satin finish, but that's kind of what I like anyways. So now we can move on to building the rest of the aircraft. Here I'm just putting some tape in here to mask off the inner white portion of the intakes so that the outer portions can get painted the body color. Doing this now is so much easier than doing it later on in the build, so that's why I'm choosing to do it now. And then we just stuff this piece of sponge in there to block off the rest. So here we're installing the actual exterior parts of the intakes. Like I said, Academy does a pretty good job of like how this is all engineered together for the most part. I mean, parts fit really well into their locating tabs, but it does leave some slight alignment issues with certain parts. And it's just, they made some interesting choices here in the engineering. Now, these panels here on the lower wings were amazing. Like the way that they fit in was almost perfect. I mean, just almost flawless. And once the model is built, you almost can't tell. Another modification you need to make to the back area here, if you want to keep the metal parts separate, is you have to clip out these parts on the horizontal stabilizer so that it'll allow you to slot them in after the fact. The way it's engineered is they would have you actually install it ahead of time. But in order to make the metal parts removable, you have to make that slight modification there. And but once you do, it works perfectly. So now we can get the cockpit and nose wheel well installed into the front fuselage. You'll note here all the really large locating tabs for this. I mean, Academy does a good job of nearly making this a push-fit kit with the way everything fits together, but it's good. It just wasn't executed well in certain areas. But once we get the fuselage halves together, there's only a few little seams that we have to sand and fill. So I went ahead and did that off camera, but basically just a little seam along the top and then a seam along the bottom, and that was really it. So the front half gets fit into the back half. Now I really liked that joint with that big like round tab. I mean, it leaves no question how it fits in there, but then down here on the lower part, it leaves a fairly large gap on the lower fuselage there, right behind the nose wheel well. So again, like it's really hit and miss on terms of like how precise their engineering is. But once we get the upper and lower fuselage halves together, pretty much all of the joints are along natural panel lines. So there's really not a lot of sanding and filling you have to do on there unless you really want to get down and correct a lot of those the gaps and stuff between some of the parts. That's totally up to you. I was keeping this build more just kind of like a fast knock it out kind of a build, so I wasn't terribly concerned with a lot of that stuff that I would normally be. These little inserts on the side, again, there's kind of a step there, even though like the way that it fits into the other part is pretty positive. Like there's no other way to wiggle it around in there. So it's just, like I said, the F-14 goes together so well, and the F-18 is so well engineered that this was just kind of like, it felt like a step back for how well they can do a kit. I mean, in the end, it still looks like an F4 or an F-15, so it's nitpicks and gripes, but I kind of expected better. Instrument combing going on, heads-up display going on. The canopy is one piece. You do not have the option of displaying the canopy open. Again, kind of a pain, but that's in line with their F-18 kit. Their F-18 kit's the same way. You could cut them and open them. That's not out of the realm of possibility, but I don't necessarily like cutting glass if I can avoid it. So here we're adding all the weapons pylons, and in hindsight, it probably would have been easier to do a lot of the painting work had I not done that, but 2020 and all that. Masking the canopy, I am using the Kit Mask canopy masking set for this, which performed flawlessly and fit perfectly, so no complaints there. Installation is pretty simple. You just take the appropriate parts and put them on the clear part where they're supposed to go. The actual framing on the clear part itself is pretty pronounced, so it's not difficult to make sure that it's fitting correctly. So that works in your favor. And again, Kit Masks has made an excellent set of masking templates here for your kit, so highly recommend them, and makes this job so much easier. And I've shown different types of ways of masking canopies across many of my videos. And if you have the extra $10-15 to spend on a masking set, I almost always say go for it. It's such a huge convenience and saves so much time. So definitely recommend it. All right, so everything was primed black, and I did that all off camera. And we're going to start by painting the metallic area for the engines. So this was painted over a gloss black. The rest is painted over kind of a satin matte black. Obviously the gloss black helps to enhance the shine of the metallic color, and really, really pleased with how this is looking. I in my mind, because I decided to do the D-Day anniversary markings, I imagined the aircraft would have been kept slightly cleaner than a normal operating F-15, and so for that I opted for little weathering. Now we're moving on to the overall color. Kind of one of the bummers about modern U.S. Air Force jets is just kind of the dull nature of the paint job, which is one of the reasons why I was really excited to do the anniversary paint job, because it has a lot more color to it and just kind of it's a little bit more exciting. But we're going to go ahead and give everything a nice good coat of the gunship gray there. And then while that is drying, I masked off the actual nozzles here, and we're going to give those a coat of steel, just to kind of create some contrast with the other parts of the metallic area. So this I'm just spraying on really thin, not trying to like glob it on, but just almost like tint the previous aluminum color, and revealing the masking shows that it looks pretty good. I know a lot of people complain about the Alclad paints not being durable, but I've had very little problem with the paint in terms of like putting masking over it and having it like pull off or get ruined. Obviously you want to be careful. Like I'm really trying to be careful with these tweezers here. It wouldn't take much for a little scratch or nick into that metallic paint, but I mean, I find them pretty easy to work with. So that kind of wraps up the metallic areas. Quite pleased with how they turned out, and moving back on to some more masking for the actual aircraft. We're going to do the small anti-glare panel. From the pictures that I found of this aircraft, it didn't look like it was painted in like an olive drab. It was much more of like a camo green. So that's why I'm going with that color here. And it's pretty easy. So the actual panel is done along panel lines, so it's easy to get that masked off and where it needs to go. There is a large decal that will go underneath there to match up. So that's kind of nerve-wracking. Now, you might be wondering, Brett, why are you painting this pink? Well, I've been told that pink is a good undercolor for painting red, because red's a somewhat translucent color, and painting it over like the gray of the aircraft wouldn't be quite as vibrant. And normally I would have painted it white and then painted the red, but someone said, hey, you should try painting it pink. So that's what I'm doing here, and I figured I'd give it a try. The pink went down really nice. It was actually a pretty good color. It went down solid and had good coverage. So if you're ever in the need of a pink color, this one works pretty good, kind of like a bubblegum pink. But I was curious to see how the actual red would perform over the pink, if it would be any different than painting over white. So here we're getting our fire red, and it was evident pretty quickly that the red goes over the pink really well, and they're both the pink complements the red, helps give it a good like warm hue. But ultimately, I couldn't, with the final product, I couldn't really see that much of a difference than if I had used white instead of pink as my base. So, I mean, it works, and it works good. I don't necessarily know that it provides any additional benefits over using a white base or even a light gray base, but I mean, it works. So there you go. Now you've learned something new, hopefully, that you can base coat red with pink. But yeah, I mean, there you go. So with the anniversary ones, they had one with a red tail, one with a yellow tail, and one with a blue tail. And I opted for the red tail. I really liked how it stood out. So now we can mask off and paint the invasion stripes. And this was difficult. Obviously, you can see the invasion stripes across the fuselage go over multiple weapons pylons, and I actually ended up removing the center pylon to aid in painting, just because it was becoming such a pain masking over all of these pylons and keeping my lines straight. And painting these invasion stripes really was a struggle, because I had to make sure I was measuring. I mean, really needed to get precise measurements in terms of how big they were supposed to be and how much they were supposed to be spaced apart. And it took a while to get this right. And even then, like, I still had a few areas where some of the lines were a little bit thicker than the others, and I had to go back and correct them. But I mean, this probably took me a good 2 days to get through this whole process of painting these invasion stripes. And it's funny because painting invasion stripes on a Mustang, for example, that's no sweat. But for whatever reason, this felt way more difficult. But the results are worth it in the end, because the invasion stripes really add like this huge pop of color to the aircraft and really make it stand out. And it just looks cool. Invasion stripes just look cool on any aircraft, basically, is what I'm discovering. So yeah, just take my time here. Like I said, I had to measure out all of the stripes and cut them again if I didn't quite get it right. And there we go. In the end, it worked out. And there were a few areas where I had some overspray that I had to touch up, but remarkably, even around those weapons pylons, I managed to get some pretty crisp lines. Here's a little spot that I appreciate Academy for. This little piece here is not painted on the actual aircraft, and the fact they left it as a separate part makes it easy, less masking. I did ultimately decide I wanted to add a little bit of post-fading to the aircraft, just because it was still an operational aircraft. And even though I imagine it would have been kept clean, it still would have shown few signs of some paint wear. So just very, very slight hint of fading. This will just help break up the monotonous shape of the large flat body, and just add a little tiny visual interest to the completed project. But really wasn't going overboard on the weathering with this, so this is really kind of the extent of it, as it were. So once all the main painting is done, we can go ahead and give everything a nice good coat of clear in preparation for decals and weathering. And you'll notice there that I have a nice, fresh, brand new bottle of clear coat. So it's always fun running out of clear coat halfway through a project, but fortunately, my local hobby shop keeps me well stocked. I opted not to do weapons on this aircraft, which is kind of somewhat against what I normally like to do. I normally love to load up everything with as many weapons as I possibly could fit on there, but it just kind of made more sense to me for this aircraft to not have a weapons loadout. and just to kind of help, not take attention away from the colorful paint job. So once everything's gloss coated and that's cured, we can move on to decals. The Academy decals are cartographs, so they are going to be about the best decals you can get. I was concerned about this checker detail going on, how it would fit, but actually it fit really well. I did have to do a little bit of trimming here, and you'll see that in just a moment with a knife. So I'm going to trim out the bottom here just so I can get the bottom to lay out flat, but I'm trimming it along the break between checkers so that I'm able to kind of smooth that over and blend it in. But I mean, it went on pretty much without a fuss, even over that aerial that sits right on the bottom there. So pretty pleased with that, to be honest. That was kind of the one thing I was really nervous about and concerned would have some trouble, but it went down pretty easy. So now we can move on to the tails. Again, we're going to get more color here. So we got the Statue of Liberty decal going on, and these performed well. Like I said, I mean, it's cartograph. You can't. I have yet to have a bad experience with cartograph decals. So, take that for what it is. That is definitely a good thing that Academy has done is exclusively used cartograph for their decals, at least in the last, in their releases from like the last 10 years or so, maybe even more. But applying the decals is simple. You just lay them on. I'm just using that little Q-tip there to roll out any excess water underneath the decal, and using paintbrushes to get them into place, and getting rid of the excess water there. And then we can go over everything with our Solvaset. This will just help them snuggle down and conform to all of the details and panel lines. So after another coat of gloss to seal in our decals, I'm going to go ahead and give it a panel wash. And for that, I'm using the Flory Models Dark Dirt Wash. And honestly, this is going to be the extent of my weathering, is just, a panel wash. But there's just so much panel detail and rivet detail and fastener detail on this aircraft that it would be a shame not to do a panel wash and really just bring out all that lovely detail. So this basically just gets slapped on everywhere, all over the model. I even applied it onto the metallic areas as well, so to pick out those panels. And then once it dries, just take a paper towel that's slightly damp with water and rub off all the excess, and it leaves behind the wash in the panel lines and removes it from the surface, and you get a nice good panel wash there. So you do kind of have to work at this wash to get it off. I mean, it's not like you're rubbing it down to like bare plastic, but it does take a little bit of effort, even with a damp cloth, to get that off. But I think that's for the better. So with the panel wash done, we can give everything a matte coat. This will seal in all of our work and take down that shine a little bit. And like I said, if you cut the matte coat with the Vallejo matte varnish with X-28 thinner, instead of going dead flat, it will leave a slight shine, more of a satin finish, which is what I prefer. So, but if you want more of like an actual dead finish, I would cut it with like distilled water or something instead of X-28. So everything gets a nice coat of this. The only thing I won't coat with the matte coat is the metallic engine area, just because I want to maintain that metallic shine. And now we can remove our masking. Like I said, the actual kit masking performed flawlessly. The paint edge was perfect. I did have a little bit of overspray on the areas where I had put my blue masking tape on to kind of block in the rest, but that's not an issue with the kit mask templates. So, but cleaning up the overspray was pretty simple. Just a little bit of X-28 thinner on a Q-tip, and that pretty much cleaned it all up. So nice and shiny. So now with that done, we can move on to getting the whole aircraft put together. So you have to be careful getting this section installed. There's a little bit of a fit game trying to get the top and bottom all lined up correctly. But once you do get it, it does just click into place, and you almost wouldn't know that it was a separate part. So I'm really pleased with the modifications that I made in order to do this. Totally worth it. So like I said, once it gets clicked in there, it's in and you're good, and it looks good. Really, really pleased with how that looks and everything. So now we can get these little the end pieces on that we painted red earlier. And again, it's nice that Academy engineered the back end this way. Specifically, I don't know that they necessarily did it specifically so you could do this, but it's pretty obvious that this was an option that they had considered. So I appreciate that. And it just, less masking, the better. And again, I just love all that the pop of that red color on the tail. So here's our modified horizontal stabilizers getting snapped into place. And like I said, making those modifications made the whole painting and assembly process so much easier. Landing gear going into place. I did have some trouble getting the landing gear in, and that's on me. I didn't dry fit this earlier, but the instructions say that you're supposed to be able to install it this way, but I found there to be quite troublesome, and had to lift up the nose there, right there. That actually bent the plastic a little bit, and I had to get that force back in there, but it is what it is. The actual detail on the landing gear is really nice. It looks really good, and they don't give you weight on wheels, so you have to kind of sand a flat spot if you want to go for that look, which I recommend doing. It just looks a little bit better in my opinion, but installation is pretty simple. Fortunately, the F-15, they leave a lot of their doors closed on the ground, so you don't have to worry about with a lot of open doors. Getting our lantern pods and sniper pod installed. I do like the way the F-15 carries these, and then we can get our drop tanks and missile rails installed. So pretty iconic for the F-15. And that about wraps it up. So in the end, I'm glad I built this kit, and I'm really quite pleased with how it turned out. I think I got this one built in about 12 days, and but it's not Academy's best at their modern kits. But like I said, if you're going to build this one, you 100% need to get aftermarket engines. I got Aries. I know there are other companies that make aftermarket for it, so I mean, I'm sure they're all great, but just make sure you're getting the aftermarket engines. So if you've made it this far to the video, I appreciate it. Thank you. If you're not a subscriber already, I would please ask that you consider subscribing. And I try to get content out every week. I need to give a huge shout out to my patrons for helping support the channel. We've been getting a lot of new patrons lately, so this is really exciting. And that support helps me to bring better content to you and make the videos higher production value. So I appreciate them. I appreciate you guys watching, and we'll see you on the next video.